that we are recording our workshop, as we are now having our workshops held in public and recording them to then put them online so that any interested community members can have a look at what we've been discussing with regards to our representation review. So I would like to welcome Stephen Hill, who we have with us from elections.com as our subject matter expert, who will be supporting our team, of course, to work our way through the workshop today, which will be facilitated by our staff, so that enables me to actually participate as opposed to chairing, considering it is in relation to our elected representation going forward. So I'll hand over to the team.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to try and keep us on time today because we've only got 2 hours and we've got a lot of content to cover. We are lucky enough to have Stephen here to help us cover off any of the detailed questions, being a subject matter expert, but largely Jane and Anna are going to take us through the content. And we hope today to, I suppose the purpose of today largely is to try and narrow us down in terms of the options to get through, hopefully, to a top 4. That's the purpose and the objective of today's workshop. So we do have a lot of material to cover. We will try and get to a point of breaking out into small groups and try and spend some time in smaller groups going through some of those options to narrow down and come back and see if we have any similarity in thinking around narrowing down the options. And go through from there. But I'm going to hand over now to Jane and Anna, and they're going to take you through a bit of a summary, and we'll get into it.
Kia ora all. Welcome to the workshop. Thank you so much to our Ngā Mānuka o Te Iwi members that have joined us today. It's really good to have your input on these things. So we're going to run through very briefly a wee introduction, a little bit on the Māori wards and the new government, well, the proposed government legislation, but we're going to keep that quite tight because there's a paper coming to Council on Thursday on that where we can discuss it in greater detail. And I believe you've got a webinar on Friday with the DIA about that as well. We'll run through the communities of interest. Jane's going to present the scenarios we've come up with so far, and then we'll have a discussion about those, followed up by touching on community boards and where to from here after today. So as you know, the representation review covers quite a lot of different things. It looks at the basis of elections, so whether we're going to have a ward structure in Ahuriri or whether we're going to have a mixed system with wards and at-large seats. It looks at the council size, so how many elected members we have, and they include the Māori ward councillors as well. We look at ward configurations, the boundaries, whether they need to move from the existing wards, and how many elected members you might have in each ward, names, and whether we need any community boards. So we did some pre-consultation with the community at the end of last year, which has helped to inform us so far. From today, we will go out for some more pre-consultation to test the models that are preferred. Hopefully we find the preferred ones today. We're going to do some targeted engagement with mana whenua and the community through that time, have another council workshop, and then it'll be time to make a decision on the initial proposal. The dates can all be moved a little bit. There's a little bit of wiggle room, but we do have to work to legislated timeframes, so can't drag on too long.
Yeah. We thought it was just useful to include a slide on the history of Napier's representation arrangements, because of course not everyone may be aware of that. Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Or yep. So back in 1997 to 1989, you'll see there was an at-large system. And then with the reorganisation of local government in 1989, we introduced a ward system, as did most councils at that point. Most councils still have a ward system. There are some councils that have a mixed system, some have at-large, but predominantly it's a ward system. We then moved to an at-large system, away from the ward system. Then in 2006, council actually put out an initial proposal to stay at large and reduce the number of councillors to 10. And then at that point, there was a lot of submissions and council stuck with that. And then it got overturned at the Local Government Commission. So there was a hearing and people came like, I think it was the Maraenui Residents Association, Taradale Residents Association, some members of the public, and they spoke about the need to represent geographically based communities of interest. And so therefore a mixed system was then introduced in Napier to allow for at-large and ward representation. So then in 2018, we undertook a comprehensive review to look at communities of interest and look at how the different systems had been used over the years, and council landed on the 4 wards, so a ward-only system. That went to the Local Government Commission and they upheld that decision. So that was obviously what we've got. Council size has pretty much always been 12, except for one time when it was 13, and we've never had community boards. So that's just a quick history.
Thanks. I won't spend too long talking about the Māori wards and the new legislation because I know pretty much as you do about this new legislation. The government has signalled its intention to reinstate the provision for a binding poll on the introduction of Māori wards, and essentially that leaves a council such as yourselves, which has already made the decision to introduce Māori wards but has not yet implemented it, in the position of having to make a choice at some stage between 2 options, and they are either to rescind the decision which you've already taken, which would trigger a mini representation review, or to hold a poll at the next election. So at the 2025 election, a poll would be held, which I think our understanding at this stage is that would then be binding on subsequent to elections. So that option of holding a poll at 2025 next year does mean that the decision you have already made would stand for 2025, but then beyond that it would be dependent on the poll. There's a lot more detail to come. We don't yet know what the transitional arrangements are going to look like and what impacts there might be on timelines. The government has signalled that there will be some changes to timelines, so like you, we're really waiting for that next level of detail, and I do understand you've got a paper coming later in the week and a webinar with DIA as well, which might help to fill in some of the gaps. So I think the advice that that is being given to most councils at the moment is don't rush into any decisions. There's no need for decisions right at this stage, but it's good to be aware of what those options are and just have those in the back of your mind as you're working through this next stage.
Question?
Yep.
We've had binding referendums before. What was the percentage required? How was it decided?
So the provision in the past has been that a poll can be demanded by 5% of the electors. So you would have to have 5% of electors in the district demand a poll, and that would trigger a poll. So again, we don't know whether that will be carried forward into the new legislation or whether it may be some other basis of triggering a poll.
50% threshold, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 50% would need to vote for or against.
Pure 50-50.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Was there any other questions on that at the moment? No? Great. Cool. So communities of interest, with the representation review, and I think we might have touched on this with you before, You can't just decide, oh, we'll just split Napier in 4 and that's going to be our wards. You have to think about how the community is made up and where there are pockets of people that are like-minded and use the same facilities, and all that sort of thing. So there's no definition as such in the Local Electoral Act about communities of interest, but a common one that people are using is what's up on the screen there. So it's a 3-dimensional concept. So perceptual is the sense of belonging to a clearly defined area, having a sense of community identity. So, that's your community groups, churches, all those sorts of things, feeling connected to your neighbours, and having some similarities in terms of demographics and things like that. Then there's the functional dimension, which is the ability of an area to meet the community's needs for physical and human services, so schools and supermarkets and those sorts of things. And political is the ability for elected members to be accessible to the residents and represent their interests. So that's where we're looking at how many councillors we have in each ward and is it fair representation for that area and effective. So that's what we've been doing some background work on. We sent you out a summary of what we've got, but we've actually got quite a long document with lots of different information in it. And to get that information, a very comprehensive analysis was done in 2018 by Jane and her team that were working on the rep review. I think it was really just you, wasn't it? But she did a lot of work at that point in time, went through all the old records and things. So we're building on that with what's changed since then to understand whether the communities of interest in Napier have changed since that time. So we've used a lot of the council surveys that we do, satisfaction surveys, and the pre-engagement that we did at the end of last year, census data. But unfortunately, we haven't got the latest census data. It's still the census before. We do have some estimated population numbers, but we don't have the demographic data. So we've used lots of different things to help inform us about how Napier might have changed. So some of the key findings that we've found so far is that a lot of residents identify Napier City as their community of interest. In the pre-consultation data engagement we did at the end of last year, 34% featured or cited features across Napier as giving them a sense of belonging, like the Marine Parade. Interestingly, 44% of Māori identified Napier as their community of interest, but the Māori respondents on that survey, unfortunately, we didn't have a big enough sample for it to be a true representation, so we just take those results with a grain of salt, but hopefully get some better ones going forward. So there's a few bits there. 26% of people felt most connected to their suburb. Only 5% felt a sense of belonging to their electoral ward. However, 70% identified their ward correctly. And obviously, since the last representation review, we've had a lot of development across the city, so we need to think about that. Te Awa, Mission Hills, all of those big new developments, as well as big new shopping centres like the one on Taradale Road and that sort of thing. So far, the feedback from mana whenua and the wider community is there's little appetite for a larger council. The preferred is status quo or smaller. And most survey respondents preferred the ward system, with top reasons being local representation, greater knowledge, works well, happy with it, and good access to elected members. and that is similar information. Current ward system broadly accommodates the communities of interest. Obviously, Ahuriri Ward and Taradale Ward have a lot more similarities than the Onikawa, Tamatea and Nelson Park wards, which have similar socioeconomic stats. And then Nelson Park obviously has Maraenui, Onikawa South, Mariwa East and Nelson Park within its boundaries, and these are the areas with the highest deprivation in the city. So on to the scenarios. Is there any questions about communities of interest? No.
It's for Nelson Park Ward. Hi, Jane. There's two institutions that are sort of within Maraenui, which are, I think, in the Taradale Ward, and that's Pukemoki Moki Marae and the King's House Church, both on Riverbend Road. Would it be possible for us to consider, even though nobody lives in those buildings, they're very much part of that community. There are major parts in those community, actually. Because as far as I know, they're both outside, just out on the very edge.
Right.
And they don't have anybody sort of living next door to them, so it wouldn't be a difficult adjustment to make.
Certainly something we can. King's. I know the one. Yeah.
Cool,
Yep.
thank you, Maxine.
We'll make a note of that and have a look at it.
Okay, so with the scenarios, I mean, obviously the big change this time is that we've.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Is that right? So the big thing this time that's different from last time is that council made a decision to introduce Māori wards. So that sort of helps us frame what options are available to us. So feedback so far, and I would just put the sort of disclaimer, it hasn't been a lot, but so far we're sort of getting some feedback that for Māori wards, Mana Whenua is looking at 2 Māori ward councillors and 1 citywide Māori ward. So just keep that in mind as we're working through these options, and because you'll see that some options might present 2 and some might present 1. So we just need to remember to, we would have to have a very good reason, and the Local Government Commission would want to see what our rationale is if we weren't providing, say, 2, and that was Mana Whenua's wish that there is 2. So we just have to keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run through each option. Then we'll open it up after each option for any questions of clarification. And then at the end, we're going to go out into some breakout session. So you're going to be put into smaller groups and then have an opportunity to actually rank the scenarios and then come back and we'll talk through them. So the next thing I just wanted to talk about is the number of Māori ward councillors. So I must apologise, we had a slight error in the first paper we provided on introducing Māori wards. So it's actually 9 general ward councillors is kind of that tipping point from 1 to 2. So if you have 9 general ward councillors, you can actually have either 1 Māori ward councillor or 2. So you can see from that table, anything above 10 general ward councillors gives you must have 2, and anything from 8 and below you must have 1. So does that make sense to everyone? Because so basically so this can be a little bit tricky. The at-large seats, actually you don't bring them into the calculation. So it's the general ward seats and the overall council to size, which is minus the at-large. Yeah. So right. So when we're talking about these options, we have to keep going back to the kind of key principles, so which is communities of interest, effectively representing communities of interest, and fair representation. So the options that we're presenting today all comply with fair representation. We haven't given you any options which don't meet that plus or minus 10%. We just have to, so basically, we could model anything. Like Anna said, you could draw lines on a map and say, here's our model, but we have to be able to justify it. And the Local Government Commission will look at it, and they'll look at it based on those criteria. So it's just to keep that in mind. There's a little bit of a minor caveat with mesh block modelling because of the information stats have given us so far. It's based on something called statistical areas, which are like a larger size area than a mesh block. The mesh block is this kind of smallest level of information they collect. So what we're going to do is once you've landed on 3 or 4 options to present to the public, we'll then go and get stats to model on a mesh block level. And then if there are any minor changes like what Maxine just mentioned about looking at could you adjust this boundary to over here, we can then look at that in detail. But the main thing is to try and land on what are the main options today. Okay, so options 1 and 2 are basically taking our current ward structure. Some people might say, well, if it's not broken, let's just keep going status quo. So there are 2 options here. So this one here, option 1, oh, sorry, Anna, can you go to this one? This is really the closest option to status quo. So it's basically taking what we have now and saying, based on what we have now, we've made the decision to introduce Māori wards, and what do we get? And the main difference you'll see is that Nelson Park ward end up sort of losing a councillor, and that's because of the numbers around the general electoral population and the Māori electoral population, because there's such a high percentage of the Māori electoral population residing in Nelson Park ward. And you can't include those people in the figures anymore. So that's why we're not making this up. There's a good justification why these figures exist, basically. So this one here, obviously you can see we've got 2 Māori ward councillors, 13, not much more than, it's not a much greater size than we've got now. So it's pretty easy to accommodate with minimal change. If you wanted just to sort of keep going how we are, let's introduce Māori wards, this would probably be the option for you. One benefit is it gives voters in the high deprivation areas, like what Anna mentioned, specific representation. So the current ward system, that's a benefit to it. It's close to pretty much the exact numbers of ward councillors that we've got now. And the general wards, if we just go back to that diagram, in this, so in here you can see you've got Māori wards 2 seats, but you've also got Ahuriri and Onikawa Tamatea with 2 seats as well. So some people might say, well, that's quite a benefit. It means that there's a couple of wards on par with Māori wards being 2 seats as well. So yeah. Are there any questions of clarification before we go to the next one?
So yes, just in light of the fact now that with that earlier slide you had established that it could be 10 plus 2, because if I reflect on earlier conversations, that wasn't an option. It had to be 11 plus.
Yes, and that's where we got.
But that's not what you've shown us there. Is that because the size of the number of voters, the number of residents in Taradale means they must have 4 ward councillors, or could they reduce to 3 and then you retain?
No. So this is all done, the modelling, which, sorry, I haven't included the table per se there, but in the document that you've been sent, emailed in the options, it will show the exact number of councillors for each ward.
Population.
Yeah, so for the population in each ward.
Yeah.
And so that's that plus and minus 10%. So no, you can't. So basically we've done the modelling to show if you keep the current ward structure, I can't model it any other way. This is 11 general ward councillors, is the lowest I can get it.
Yeah.
Otherwise it just doesn't stack up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could have 11 or you could have 12, and then anything above I don't think worked either. So it was only like 11 or 12 general ward councillors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions before we move to the next one? No, cool. Okay, so option 2, same basically, but this one you get a added advantage potentially of 2 at-large seats as well. So mixed system. So again, like we know when we're thinking through these options, we have to think kind of broadly. Like we've had a ward system, we did have a mixed system before, we went to the ward system. Are there any good arguments, to say why would we go back to a mixed system? So it's basically the same details as the other one. Obviously, having a larger size council, you could argue, well, it gives everyone slightly more representation because you've got more councillors. could be seen as a benefit, perhaps more viewpoints. Some people might say that at-large councillors might bring a citywide perspective as well. And overall, everyone gets to vote for more people. So obviously you vote, so just to clarify too, because sometimes this gets confused, but the Māori electoral population and the general electoral population all get to vote for at-large seats. Yeah. So I guess the sort of negatives of this, maybe, some people say that perhaps a larger council, it might be harder to hold people to account because there's more people. Maybe there's a bit of a confusion for both the councillors and the public. Like, you know, I'm a city ward at-large councillor. Do I get involved in what the ward councillors are doing or the ward issues? How does that work? If I'm a member of the public, who do I go to? Do I go to this person or this person? Obviously, everyone gets lower pay because basically the remuneration authority have a pot of money, and however many councillors you have, you basically take from that pot. So maybe there's an argument to say if we had more councillors, people get less pay, possibly is it less attractive to people? I mean, these are very general sort of things that people bring up.
Councillor.
Yep, sure.
We had a totally at-large system and 2 Māori seats. That would mean that we'd be able to vote on the general roll, be able to vote for 12 people, but the Māori voters would be able to vote for 14?
No, so you can't actually have an at-large system once you've chosen to introduce Māori wards.
Oh.
So basically what it means, you can have, you have to have a ward or a mixed system. So say in your example, you wanted to have, say, 10 general ward councillors in one ward, and then you wanted to have one Māori ward of 2, that means only the people on the general electoral population can vote for the general ward councillors, and only the Māori electoral population can vote for the Māori ward councillors. Does that make sense?
You can have a district-wide ward.
A district-wide ward.
Yeah. So which essentially could be seen as like an at-large system, as close as it gets.
So
within the
people
construct.
on the general roll would have 12 votes and people on the Māori roll would have 2 or 1, it depends.
No, in the example, if you had 10 general ward seats and you had 2 Māori ward seats, then people on the general electoral population, could vote for the 10 plus the mayor, and the people on the Māori electoral roll could vote for the 2.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I thought so.
Yeah. Okay, so some may say, look, there's a greater expense to stand as a candidate for people running for the citywide at-large seats. Maybe that deters some people from being able to stand in those seats. Voters in areas that have higher voter turnout, perhaps they might be able to have more voting power, because in some areas of our city, you would have seen that we have quite low voter turnout. So if if everyone has a vote, maybe that those people won't be able to get in a preferred candidate for the at-large seats, possibly. Are there any other questions on this option before we continue? No, cool. Okay. Sorry, I should have started with this too, with why are we looking at all these different ward options? One of the reasons is because the Local Government Commission in our last representation review said, look, you've done a lot of work, but we think that you could do a bit more work on the ward configurations to see if they're kind of fit for the future, and also look at community boards in particular for disadvantaged areas. So, we've spent, I feel like, a pretty good amount of time trying to model all these different options for you. So this one here is sort of taking to say, look, we feel like the Nelson Park and Onikawa Tamati ward share some commonalities, and we can see that coming through in things like the voter turnout and the deprivation indexes, and the fact that they're geographically close together. Here's an option where you're basically merging two of the existing wards together. So you've got Taradao and Ahuriri and Nelson Park and Onikawa Tamati. So in this option, and then, sorry, next slide. We're looking at, so you get 2 Māori ward seats, and then you've got 4 and 5. So, some people might say, look, we feel this is a bit more simple for people to understand. There's not so many wards. They're not, 3, 2, 4, we're not sure how many people represent us. Maybe this is simpler, I don't know. It could be one argument. Sorry, I've got that one, yeah. So obviously this one allows for 2 multi-ward councillors. It perhaps could be seen as like the closest option to at-large, sort of citywide representation, but with the added benefit that you're still providing direct representation for those that are in more disadvantaged areas. So that's just something to bear in mind for those people who feel more sort of aligned with sort of a mixed system or at large. Yeah, so all general ward voters get to vote for more seats than option 1. So that's probably something else to consider. So in this option, if we just go back to the numbers, you know, suddenly someone who's in Nelson Park, or say, let's use Onekawa Tamatera as an example, you know, before they only had 2 people to vote for, but in this option, they would have 4 people to vote for. So possibly that could be seen as a benefit, and same for Ahuriri and Taradale. Nelson Park get the same, but although Nelson Park, we've also got the Māori wards as well. So
just confirming that one. If someone on the Māori roll lived in Nelson Park, could they vote for the 6 or just for the 2?
So it's all to do with what role they're on. Yeah.
So it is just the 2.
Yeah, so if they're on the Māori roll, then yes, yeah, that's right, irrespective of where they live. Yeah.
Because
Sorry, Jane. So I guess the general rule is if they're at large, they get to vote for them as well if they're on the Māori roll. But if they're in a ward system, then they get to vote for the Māori. Is that the general rule?
Yeah, so if you're on the Māori electoral roll, you can only vote for your Māori ward seats and at large and the mayor. Yeah.
Thank you.
And if we had community boards. Yeah. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Cool. Okay, so the next one is just, we're trying to give you like a range of options to stimulate discussion here. So this one, Morahu and his team and us, we had sort of some discussions early on around, you know, like we don't want to be presumptuous, of course. So, you know, we don't know, like would maybe Mana Whenua would be okay with 1 Māori ward councillor because they'd actually prefer to have more. Sorry, yep.
I'm sorry, not to be rude, but could we refer to them as people on the Māori roll because they're tangata whenua as well as mana whenua?
Yes, sure.
Who this affects, so.
Sure, sorry, thank you for that clarification. Yep, so people on the Māori roll, that perhaps this option would give them a lot more votes than other options because they can vote for at large. But it's at the expense, of course, of losing a dedicated Māori ward seat. So, but we've put it up there to just show what that could potentially look like. So obviously it's the same combining of the wards. That's really the key difference there. So what have we got now? Yeah, just also probably to say that option 4 probably could be considered quite a departure from our current, because we moved to a ward only system. So now we're kind of saying, well, we'd retain kind of the ward structure, but actually this one, the other one, it's tips the balance towards at large. So it's kind of moving us quite away from our current system. Option 5. Again, put this in kind of, I guess, to stimulate a discussion. So again, you're looking at only 1 Māori ward seat. However, everyone also, the general ward seats are less as well. So proportionally, you're not necessarily worse off from having 2 in a larger size council. You've got 1, but it's a smaller size council. But with this option, you would really need to probably look at introducing community boards. So in this one, sorry, can you go to the next one? We're sort of thinking about, this could be potentially like a strategically focused, small size council. You devolve decision-making powers to 1 or multiple community boards. It's likely that that would mean that being a councillor would become a full-time position, like it is in many of the other larger cities, like Hamilton and Tauranga. So, that might attract different types of candidates potentially with higher pay. Equally, it might deter some people because they might not think they can leave their jobs. to stand on council. This is a really significant departure from previous representation arrangements. There's a high population member ratio because suddenly you've got not many councillors doing the representation. It's kind of outside of what we would consider our target range, but there are examples where other councils who are bigger than us have a similar population member ratio. So I thought we'll include it in the mix. And just to showcase, like for instance, in Tauranga, they've just done this recently. They've moved to single member wards because, of course, they're in the context of going through with having the commissioners come in and lead their council. So they've got single member wards for all their general wards. So it's quite a high population member ratio. See 16,000. Whereas ours is sitting at about 5,000. So, it's quite a difference. They don't have community boards either. Hamilton's another example where they have 2 wards, the West and East, and then the 2 Māori citywide councillors. So they don't have community boards either. However, they did have quite a discussion at their local government commission hearing on it, and they said they were going to look at exploring a concept of community committees for each ward because they felt that they weren't quite ready to establish community boards, but possibly they needed to do some more thinking in that area. So just wanted to put those out there just as what some of the other councils are doing. Are there any questions of clarification?
Could you just repeat what you said in Tauranga around the commissioners? So this was after the commissioners?
Yeah, so the commissioners are still there. So this will be I think they're going through their election in 2024. It's not at the same time as us. Yeah.
Hi, Jane.
Yes, hi, Annette.
Oh.
Hi, sorry not being able to be there, guys. Just a question from me, that single member ward structure that you've got on the screen at the moment, have you prepared an option for us that might look like that if we would actually reduce our ward boundaries?
Oh, sorry, is it the one of Tauranga, isn't it? Is that the one you're meaning? Or?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, so if we had one councillor per ward, general ward? 12 wards. Is that what you mean, over like 12 or over 10, for example?
Yeah, exactly, something like that. So you had a mixed model, or even if you had a mixed model, yeah.
I did do a little bit of modelling because when I saw this one, I was just interested to see if it stacked up. I couldn't get it to work very easily, so I couldn't get it to work within the plus or minus 10%. Yeah.
Okay, and sorry, while I have the mic, that I think you mentioned somewhere does sort of like an east-west, north-south style ward boundary. Did you try and see if something like that could work for us, plus or minus the 10% as well?
Is that from the email that you sent me?
Yes.
Yeah, so that one, we'll get to that. That's coming up for options 7 to 9.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We won't talk about community boards now because we've actually got a whole section on community boards shortly. So, right, so just moving on now to option 6. Okay, so this one was looking at potentially a semi-rural ward. So obviously back in the day we had the Hawke's Bay County Council that came into Napier City's sort of area. When we did the analysis last time, Miani, Awatoto, Bayview and Priority came out as sort of distinct community of interest. Do they need separate representation or particular representation? I don't know, but they've got some distinct. Can you go to the next one? They've got some distinct characteristics. So this is an option just to put to you for consideration. I guess it gives a united voice to semi-rural areas as opposed to those areas being included in both Taradale and Ahuriri wards. It's one less in terms of from our current council size. We did have quite a lot of discussion in our last rep review about single member wards and multi-member wards for those who are around then. So there was some examples where when we had single member wards, people were getting elected unopposed because no one else stood. So that could potentially be a risk with having like one seat as a, well, that can be for anything, if it's a Māori ward or any ward. Yeah, so just to bear that in mind as well. Right, so any questions or clarification for that one? Yep, Richard.
The likes of Te Awa and Mission Hills, how would you deem them to be semi-rural when they're pretty much going to just be normal type suburb?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in a current ward structure, and in this example, Te Awa is actually part of Ahuriri. So in our current ward, oh sorry, not Ahuriri, Nelson Park. Nelson Park.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's Taradale.
Taradale.
Only at the beginning. It
Hang
cuts
on,
off.
Taradale, is it?
Yeah, most of it's
Oh,
in
Nelson
Taradale.
Park.
Yeah, but most of it.
Yeah, SA2s. Yeah, so it's half and half, right? It's Nelson Park and Taradale. Yeah.
It's on Te Awa Avenue where it changes, but most of Te Awa subdivision is in Taradale.
Taradale, yeah.
Yeah. So this would be that this wouldn't include the Te Awa subdivision because that's already in another area. But yes, that's right. So there is projected growth in all those areas that are close by.
So that's all things you need to sort of think about when you're making this decision. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to options 7 to 9. So back in 1989, we had 3 wards. I actually don't know exactly what they were, and I'm trying to find out from our archivist. So when I find out, I will let you know. But so we just thought to model some options based on 3 wards. Last time councillors asked us to do additional modelling on 3 wards. So I've taken those options we looked at and modelled them on the current numbers, because of course the numbers have changed since last time because of the not including the Māori electoral population and with the general electoral population. So here are 3 options that do work. There was another option, I think, to include Priority Hills within Taradale, which I couldn't get to work. So I've just presented the ones that do work, plus or minus 10%. They're all kind of variations on a theme, although I guess you could say option 7 is a bit different because you're looking at 3 general ward councillors for each of those 3 general wards. And obviously it's a slightly smaller council size. So just to have a look at option 7, if we can go to that slide. Could you keep going? Yeah, so sorry, you might want to go back to the map, sorry. Yeah, so you can see this one here, Ahuriri ward is quite sort of a large area. And it accommodates for the Onekawa ward, sort of, it's kind of a merging of the current ward boundaries between Nelson Park and Onekawa Tamatea, except that you're taking out Nelson Park and McLean Park and you're giving those to the Ahuriri ward. This one kind of makes Taradale a little bit smaller because you've obviously, you're not giving them Miani or Priority, so you're really just sticking to the Taradale suburbs and Green Meadows. That share kind of similar socioeconomic stats. What else have we got here? One benefit, obviously it allows for 2 Māori ward seats, and the other ones being 3 are not so much bigger, so it's all kind of quite equal. It would recognise that the newer developments, like what Richard was just talking about with Mission Hills, etc., perhaps because of the road connections, making it so easy just to get into our city, perhaps those when those developments actually get done, you know, it will be very easy for people to get into city and in the city, so functionally their community of interest might be more aligned with the city than Taradale possibly. Yep.
So have you already factored in the Mission Hills being full of people?
No. You can only go on what you've got, the data you've got now. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but it's something just to it's just something to consider, I guess. There are a few outliers. Nelson Park, McLean Park, Ahuriri and West Shore all have kind of above average deprivation ratings. Obviously, you've got the semi-rural communities at far ends of Napier. You're sort of merging those into one ward. Also might split some functional communities of interest. So possibly some people in Jervistown might go and do their shopping and bits and pieces at Taradale. So, you know, there's different pros and cons for this. And it's obviously one less than current council size. Now with this option here, obviously with any of the options, you could add on as a extra at-large seats. So this one, for example, you're on 11. If you added some at-large seats, say 3, then, you know, it brings you up to 14. So just something else to bear in mind. With any of these options, there's always an option to add on. Yeah.
Hi Jane, what is the boundary between that green one and the blue one by the sea? Sorry. Onikawa and, yeah, what, is that George's Drive? What are those streets around it about?
Oh, I don't know if you can find it, Patrick. Can I get back to you on that one, Maxine?
Okay.
It's basically just taking, it's
about-
removing Nelson Park suburb and McLean Park suburb. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the exact street, Patrick might be able to find it for us. Okay, so now option 8 is slightly different. So this one is kind of,
Sorry, just before you move on from number 7.
Yep.
Is there any other boundary lines that could be drawn with that makeup of councillors?
oh, like 333.
Yeah, 3332. Could that makeup look different on a map?
Yes, you could make up lots of things, but they might not make sense in terms of effectively representing communities of interest, because you might be like, to get the numbers to stack up, it might be like the boundary has to go whoop, up there and then over there, and that's the issue. So yes.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, you could model for forever, essentially. I mean, there's so many different options you could do, but it's kind of, we have to just keep going back to that. What are the communities of interest? Are they geographically based? What makes sense in terms of effectively representing to them? You know, what's the overall council size necessary for a community like Napier, for access of councillors? Stephen, did you want to add anything to that discussion, or?
I think you've captured it pretty well, but you've essentially, those are the only levers you've got to play with, and that's the communities of interest. They have to make sense. You can play around with the numbers, the fair representation, but there's sort of an interaction between the fair representation, the 10%, and the communities of interest all the way through this process. You test one against the other each time as you go through them. And then the effective representation, that's about what's the system of election and the number of councillors that works each time. So I think, as Jane said, she's really put options in front of you today that have at least passed the first filter of those tests to make sense.
Jane?
Just on that one here. Look, knowing the population of Miani Awatoto and the population of Parklands, you could just about swap them out, is what Hayley's saying, because Parklands is part of Paraiti, or they call themselves Paraiti as a suburb. So I'm just wondering if that's an option in that one too, because that would make a lot more sense.
So sorry, are you saying that Parklands would be part of Taradale? No?
Parklands is near as Taradale. If Parklands was part of Ahuriri and Miani Awatoto came back into Taradale, wouldn't those be they're very similar socioeconomic? Yeah.
So this one does have Parklands in it, so, and Paraiti Hills, so that is in the blue.
What's the bit going up to Tamatea there?
That, no, the pink bit by Tamatea.
Yeah.
That is...
Barangi Road.
Is that up to Wharangi, is it? Oh, okay. I thought that was Parkland.
Is that right, Petra? Yeah.
I think, Annette, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Just looking at this option, would it be possible if you reduced equally the number of representatives so that each of the 3 wards had 2, or kept them at 3, and I believe at 9 you said there was an option for the Māori ward seat to either be 1 or 2, and then if you made either of those changes, you free up either 2 to 5 at-large seats in the same modelling?
Okay, so if I understand that's right, so you're saying if we reduced the number of general ward seats from 3 to 2 in each ward, so
Correct.
Onikawa ward would become 2 seats, and Taradale ward would become 2, and Ahuriri would become 2?
Yeah.
Yep, and so if we did that, that means that we would only be allowed to have 1 Māori ward seat.
Yes,
But like you say, yes, you could add on at-large seats. Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Yep.
Can I just ask a question going right back to the beginning? I'm just looking at some figures here of 67,510. Is that our population?
67,500.
Population total. So the maths we're doing back up a bit is 58,030.
Yeah. So that's the general electoral population. Yeah. And then, so because you've made a decision to introduce Māori wards, you now split out the general electoral population and the Māori electoral population.
So is that people over the age of 18 who are voters?
No, it's everyone.
So
Isn't it?
Everyone.
Yeah.
So the bottom figure of 9,480,
That's
is that
the Māori
only people?
So there's a calculation that Stats do, is it? They take how many people are enrolled on the Māori roll, and they add a percentage to allow for people who aren't enrolled anywhere, and that's the figure they've come up with. So we have to use the figures they give us.
But one figure includes children, and one or people under 18,
Yes,
and the other figure doesn't.
no, they all do.
Well, you can't be under 18 and on a
No,
electoral
that's
roll,
the
can you?
extra percentage that they add in. So I'm trying to remember the amount of people in Napier actually enrolled on the Māori roll is more like 5,000 or 6,000 or something like that.
I know for this purpose, having these numbers, because the plus minus 10% is really important, because of the formula that they're using. But it would be really interesting for us to have elector numbers.
I do have them. I can look them up
Amazing.
on my-
Well, or adding them to a paper or something like that, because then that gives us, an actual idea of the number of people who are able to vote in each of the wards and things. Because I get what Richard's saying. It's a little bit,
So just to clarify, the ward populations are total population in the same way that in general elections, electorate populations are total population, and that's the way that's calculated. The way the Māori and general populations are calculated is, as Anna was alluding to, stats work on the split between the Māori electoral roll and the general electoral roll, but extrapolate that to total population. So the total population is split on approximately the same basis as the electoral population, but the ward population numbers are total population in the same way as they are for general elections.
Clear as mud
Yeah, it is
for our community.
quite confusing.
instrument.
I'll have a look. I can have a look for the actual electoral enrolled numbers for you if that's helpful, but it's not something where.
No, I was trying to work out the formula, that was all.
I guess the important thing is the number of people you're representing, and you're not just representing the people that have the right to vote. You're
Yeah, that's
representing everybody that lives within that community.
And we use
so.
the numbers that we need to, because they're quite prescriptive in terms of how we put together the tables and the methodology that's used. So quite two different things, but I think if it's useful for us to provide that information, we can. We'll find that for you. Do you want to, any other questions before we're happy to carry on to option 8?
Okay, so option 8, basically no change for Taradale ward. Ahuriri ward now includes Nelson Park and McLean Park, and Onikawa ward is basically the merging of Nelson Park ward and Onikawa Tamatea ward, with obviously Nelson Park and McLean Park removed. So yep, okay, going. So yeah, again, it's just a slightly larger council size, allows for specific representation for the high deprivation areas. And yeah, I guess there's less changes too from the status quo compared to option 7 and 9 in terms of the ward configuration. Okay, any particular questions on that one? And I'll just finish off with option 9. So option 9, so basically this one, we've got quite a large ward for Ahuriri, as you can see. So you're combining all the coastal areas, and that also Parklands, Priority Hills, Mission Hills, all those kind of areas. And then you've got the Onikawa ward again, combining it, but this time there's a slight difference. So basically Onikawa ward doesn't now include Nelson Park, McLean Park, or Tamatea North and Tamatea South. So that's the main difference. So you've given Tamatea North and South to Taradale wards. So you see how Taradale ward kind of extends a bit further that way. Yeah, so that's basically all the options that we've come up with now. So we thought we would open for go out into a breakout session. So you all have a chance to talk with a couple of your colleagues around the options and to test or to discuss which ones you'd like to test with the public. I'll just hand over to Jess now if you want to just move to the next slide.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just quickly on elections, the National Elections website, the Māori roll for Napier is at 4,869 and the general roll is at 43,125. So, yeah.
Okay, yep, thank you. So I think the idea would like you to get into, I think we do 3 groups. So 3 groups of 4, 2 groups of 4 and 1 group of 3. So if we could get you into groups with the idea if you would like you to rank the options with the hope that when we come back together we'll have some commonality around hopefully some of the top options, which will help us narrow down some of the preferred options to go to the community with consultation. I don't think we'll have complete commonality, but we hopefully will have some, and we can come back and have a discussion around where we do and where we don't. You might have some of those options that you sort of want to eliminate straight away, which would be hopeful if there's some commonality there, but if there's not, we can have a discussion around that. We can come around the groups as you're having those discussions and answer questions of clarification if you have them as you're going through, and you have questions that are arising as you're reviewing and revisiting those. Not sure if you want to move or move around the room. You can.
Shouldn't we have someone from mix up the board? So we've got.
Yeah, that would be useful. So probably mix up who you normally kind of work with in your usual wards.
So members of the public don't join us in that?
No, probably not participate in the workshop, but
Okay. So we've got
you want to come down this end and we'll give you a piece of paper.
Can I, just an option that didn't come up, and I wonder if you thought of it and discounted it. Was there any option for 5 lots of 2 wards? So 1 Māori and then 4 that have 2 seats in each, so 10 councillors, 5 wards, 2 in each.
Jane can probably answer that question.
Right, we can
Probably just stick the paper up on the wall, can we?
Yeah.
If you guys want to move.
So how many in each?